I thought my grandparents were just downsizing for their golden years. I didn't know I was helping them hide a lifelong secret, a child they had abandoned decades ago. My grandparents, Eleanor and Walter, were the quintessential picture of a loving, wholesome couple. He was a retired history professor, a man with a booming laugh and an endless supply of stories about the past. She was a gentle, soft-spoken woman who tended to her garden with the same care she gave to her family. Their house, a sprawling two-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and a yard full of blooming hydrangeas, was the epicenter of our family. It held every birthday, holiday, and celebration I could ever remember. It was the place where my grandfather taught me to play chess and my grandmother baked my favorite apple pies. This house, I believed, was the foundation of our family's happiness. So, when they announced they were finally selling it and moving into a smaller condo in a retirement community, it was a bittersweet moment. Bittersweet for us, but it seemed like a new beginning for them. My grandfather, now 88, was slowing down, and the stairs had become a challenge. The yard was too much for my grandmother. They needed to simplify. I volunteered to help them pack. It felt like the least I could do, a way to say thank you for a lifetime of memories. The task was monumental, a journey through decades of their life together. Every box was a treasure chest of memories. Yellowed photographs of their wedding, my father's baby shoes, my grandmother's old recipe cards, scribbled in her elegant cursive. Each item was a puzzle piece, and I was helping to put their entire life together in a new, smaller box. Yes, I was clearing out my grandfather's study, a room filled with the scent of old books and pipe tobacco. I came across a heavy wooden desk. It was an antique, something he had inherited from his own father. My grandmother told me that all the drawers were empty, but as I began to lift it to move it, I noticed a false bottom beneath the main drawer. It was expertly crafted, the wood seamless with the rest of the desk, but a small, almost invisible notch gave it away. My curiosity got the better of me. I pried it open, my heart thumping with a mix of excitement and unease. Inside, there was a small, tattered leather pouch. I opened it and found three things: a faded, black and white photograph of a young woman I didn't recognize, a handful of letters tied with a thin, brittle ribbon, and a yellowed official document. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded the document. It was a birth certificate. The name on the certificate was Sarah. The date of birth was nearly 65 years ago. The father's name was listed as Walter Henderson, my grandfather. The mother's name was Kathleen Miller, a name I had never heard before. My world, the one built on the solid foundation of my grandparents' perfect life, crumbled in that moment. The birth certificate was irrefutable proof. My grandfather, the man who had taught me honesty and integrity, had a child I knew nothing about. And who was Kathleen Miller? Where's Sarah now? My mind reeled with 1,000 questions, but the most pressing one was a simple, devastating why. My grandmother walked in just as I was staring at the documents, her hands full of old curtains she was taking down. She saw my face, saw the pouch on the desk, and the color drained from her cheeks. The curtains slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor in a dusty heap. "Ethan, what have you found?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I just held up the birth certificate, my hand shaking violently. Her eyes, usually so kind and warm, filled with a look of pure dread. She sank into the leather armchair, her posture suddenly frail and old. "I was never supposed to know about this," I said, my voice cold and hard. A stranger's voice. "Grandpa has a daughter. Who is she? What happened?" My grandmother, Eleanor, finally broke down. She wept, silent tears carving tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "It was a long time ago, Ethan," she finally managed to say between sobs. "Before your grandfather and I were married. He was a young man, a student. He fell in love with a girl, a beautiful, spirited girl named Kathleen. They were young and foolish, and they had a child. Sarah." She told me that my grandfather came from a family of privilege and high expectations. Her family, a wealthy and influential one, disapproved of the match. They forced him to end the relationship and convinced him that an unwed mother would ruin his future. They paid Kathleen to leave town and place the baby for adoption. My grandfather, heartbroken and pressured, went along with the plan. Shortly after, he married my grandmother, an arranged marriage of sorts between two prominent families. "It's been our secret for over 60 years, she confessed, her voice filled with a lifetime of guilt. "Walter and I, we try to be the perfect couple. We build a life, a family. But the ghost of that little girl has always been between us. We never spoke of her. It was a condition of our marriage. But he never forgot her. He saved those things, the photo, the letters. He kept a part of his life hidden away, a life he lost. The betrayal was twofold. My grandfather's infidelity, his secret child, was one thing. But my grandmother's complicity, her knowing and accepting this truth for 60 years, was another. She had lived a lie, building a family on a foundation of a broken heart and a lost child. As she spoke, the reality of it all was overwhelming. My perfect family, a symbol of unwavering love, was just a myth. Your grandfather, he's not well now, Ethan, she said, her voice dropping to a plea. The doctors say his mind is going. He has moments of clarity, but they're getting fewer and farther between. This would destroy him. It would kill him to know that this has come out now. He carried this guilt his whole life. It's the only thing that could truly break him. You must promise me, Ethan. You must destroy those things and never, ever speak of this again. For him, for me, for the family. She was asking me to become a conspirator, to participate in the very lie that had defined their lives. I held the birth certificate in my hands, a tangible piece of proof that my entire family's history was not what it seemed. The name on the certificate, Sarah, was not just a name. It was a person, a life my family had discarded, a secret that had been buried in the false bottom of a desk for over half a century. And now, I was being asked to bury it all over again. What would I do? Could I really become the keeper of this devastating family secret? The birth certificate for Sarah felt impossibly cold in my hands. My grandmother's plea, her tears, and her desperate request to destroy the evidence were a heavy weight on my conscience. My perfect, loving grandmother, the woman who had nurtured me with apple pies and gentle stories, was asking me to participate in a 60-year-old lie. My grandfather, the wise, kind man whose memory I was now helping to erase, had been living a double life. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I stood in his study, surrounded by a lifetime of his cherished belongings, now tainted by this dark secret. I couldn't just destroy the evidence. I couldn't become a conspirator. The truth, once unearthed, felt like a moral obligation. My grandmother, seeing the hesitation in my eyes, tried a different tactic. She placed a trembling hand on my arm. Ethan, please. Your grandfather is very ill. He has enough to contend with. His memory is fading, and with it, his grasp on reality. Don't bring this up. Don't burden him with the sins of his youth. Let him leave this world with a measure of peace. Her voice was a cracked whisper, and I could feel the decades of pain and guilt radiating from her. Her appeal was not just for her husband, but for herself, for the life she had chosen to live that I didn't give her an answer. I simply folded the birth certificate, put the letters and the faded photograph back into the pouch, and tucked it all away in my backpack. I couldn't trust myself to destroy them, and I couldn't trust her not to try and do it herself. The pouch, once hidden in a desk, was now hidden on my back, a burden I was forced to carry that night. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions about Sarah and Kathleen. The letters were the key. They were old, tied with a brittle, fraying ribbon. I carefully untied them, the paper rustling like dry leaves. They were all written by Kathleen, addressed to Walter. The handwriting was elegant, beautiful, filled with a youthful love and a heartbreaking sorrow. In the early letters, she wrote of her joy, her hopes, and then her devastation. She wrote of giving up her baby, of the unbearable pain of saying goodbye to her own child. The letters ended abruptly after a few years. Her final one a desperate plea. Please, Walter, if you can't be with us, just let me know she is safe. Just tell me you haven't forgotten her. Our beautiful Sarah. I was consumed by an insatiable need to know what happened to Sarah, to find out if she had a life, if she had a family. The photograph was my only lead. It was a picture of Kathleen standing outside a building with a large sign that read St. Jude's Home for Children. The building looked old, an orphanage from a bygone era. A quick search online, aided by the city, names scribbled on the back of the photo, led me to a historical society website. St. Jude's Home had been a well-known orphanage in the city's downtown core, but it had been demolished decades ago. However, the records were still kept in the city's historical archives that I knew what I had to do. I had to go to the archives. This was my point of no return. I was no longer a passive bystander. I was an active participant, a detective in my own family's history. I took a day off from work, lied to my parents about a dental appointment, and went to the archives. The old building smelled of dust and paper. A kind archivist, a woman with reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, helped me find the records for St. Jude's. I spent hours poring over dusty, handwritten ledgers. I finally found the entry for Sarah. The date of birth matched the birth certificate. She had been adopted by a family named Miller, a detail that confused me. Her mother's maiden name was Miller. Had she been adopted by her own family? Then, I noticed a second, smaller note in the margin. Readopted by the Smith family, 1965. This was a dead end. The trail was cold. Just as I was about to give up, disheartened, I noticed something else in the same ledger, a few pages back. Another entry. Another birth certificate. This one was dated a decade after Sarah's in 1960. The father's name was Walter Henderson. The mother's name was Kathleen Miller. The child's name was Daniel. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just a youthful indiscretion. This was a sustained, ongoing relationship. My grandfather hadn't just given up a child. He had continued seeing this woman for years. They had had a second child, a brother to the abandoned Sarah, a child my family had also never known about. The betrayal was not a single moment of weakness, but a decades-long deception. My grandmother's pain, her complicity, now made a twisted kind of sense. She had married a man who was already deeply entangled with another woman, a man who, it seemed, could not let go of his past, even as he built a new future. That I felt a sudden, desperate need to know more about this second child. Where was Daniel? What happened to him? The archives, however, offered no more clues. The entry for Daniel was the last one in the ledger. It was a cold, hard fact without a story attached. I left the archives, the weight of this new secret pressing down on me. I was no longer just a conspirator. I was the sole keeper of a decades-long secret that was even bigger and uglier than I had originally thought. The next day, haunted by this new discovery, I drove to the address on one of Kathleen's old letters. It was a small, quiet street in a part of town I'd never been to. The house was an old, well-maintained bungalow. I was about to turn back, my courage failing me, when an elderly man in a wheelchair, a neighbor perhaps, saw me and asked if I needed help. I'm looking for someone who used to live here. Kathleen Miller. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man's eyes lit up. Kathleen. Oh, she was a dear friend. She passed a few years ago. Lived her whole life in this house. She had a son, you know, a wonderful boy named Daniel. He visited her every week without fail, even after he grew up and had a family of his own. But he was a secret, you know. She never told anyone who his father was, just that he was a very important man who loved them very much and supported them all their lives. My heart stopped. My grandfather hadn't abandoned Daniel. He had been a part of his life, a secret father who had supported his second family from the shadows. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more profound than I could have ever imagined. My grandmother's complicity, her pain, her silence. She hadn't just endured one secret child. She had endured a secret, ongoing relationship, and a second secret child. This was the true nature of their 60-year lie. The man I had idolized was a master of deception, a man who had not only cheated on my grandmother, but had also had a second family that he had secretly loved and supported his entire life. And now, as he lay on his deathbed, his secrets were all coming to light, and I was the one who had to decide what to do with them. The elderly man's words hung in the air, a final piece of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. A wonderful boy named Daniel. My grandfather hadn't simply abandoned his first child. He had been a secret father to his second, a man who had loved and supported a hidden family for decades while playing the part of the perfect husband and father in another. The perfect life I had always idealized was not just a lie. It was an elaborate, 60-year performance. My grandmother wasn't just a victim of a singular infidelity. She was the long-suffering, silent partner in a decades-long deception. I thanked the neighbor, my voice distant and hollow, and drove away, the car a silent tomb for a secret too heavy to bear alone that I couldn't go home just yet. The thought of facing my grandmother with this new information, with the knowledge that her pain was deeper and more prolonged than she had ever let on, was suffocating. I drove to a quiet park by the river, the same park where my grandfather had taught me to skip stones as a boy. The irony was a bitter pill. I sat on a bench, the birth certificate for Sarah, the letters from Kathleen, and now the ghost of a boy named Daniel pressing down on me. I felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just for myself, but for my grandmother. My grandfather had married her under false pretenses, promised to end his past, and then continued it in secret. His peaceful, Last years were a testament to his skill at keeping secrets, not to a life of honesty. That evening, I returned to my grandparents' house. The smell of my grandmother's cooking, usually a comfort, felt like a cruel deception. She was in the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up when I entered, her eyes filled with a familiar mixture of fear and pleading. She knew. She could read it in my face that I had not destroyed the evidence. "I didn't do it, Grandma," I said, my voice steady. "I couldn't. I went to the archives, and I found something else. I pulled out the birth certificate for Daniel. He didn't just have one child. He had two. He continued to see her. You knew, didn't you? You knew about Daniel. You knew this was an ongoing thing." The pot she was stirring clattered against the counter. She turned to me, her face pale, her hands trembling. She didn't deny it. Instead, she collapsed into a chair, the full weight of her lifelong secret finally crushing her. The words that came out of her mouth were not a confession, but a weary, decades-old story she had been longing to tell. "I didn't know about Daniel at first," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "When Walter and I married, the deal was for him to end his relationship with Kathleen, to put that life behind him. I knew about Sarah, but I was told she had been adopted and was safe. I thought it was over. But Walter, he never truly left her. He told me he couldn't. He said a part of his heart would always belong to her. He was a man of divided loyalty, Ethan. He loved me, but he was in love with her." She recounted a life of carefully managed half-truths. She told me of the quiet, agonizing moments when she would find him with a far-off look in his eyes, knowing his thoughts were with another woman. She spoke of the subtle, unexplained withdrawals from their joint accounts, the sudden business trips to a city where Kathleen lived. It was not a life of blissful ignorance, but a slow, decades-long erosion of trust. "Then, I found out about Daniel," she whispered, her voice thick with old tears. "It was years later, after your father was born. I saw a receipt for a hospital bill with Kathleen's name on it. He told me it was a mistake, but I knew. I confronted him, and he confessed. He told me he couldn't leave them. He felt responsible. He said he had set up a trust for them to ensure they would always be cared for. He made a promise to me, Ethan. He promised that as long as I kept his secret, our family's legacy would be safe. He said he would take care of them financially, but that our family's name, our estate, our property, would always remain with us." This was the part of the story she had been desperate to tell. She was not just a silent victim. She was a woman who had made a heartbreaking choice. She had traded her husband's full loyalty for a promise of security and legacy, a deal she had to honor to keep her own sanity and social standing. The secret was not just a burden. It was a contract. "He set up a trust, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with a new, panicked urgency. "A substantial one. He used my family's money, a portion of the dowry from our marriage, to do it. He told me it was an investment, but I found the documents later. A trust for Daniel, to provide for his education and his life. The money was a part of our family's legacy, a legacy I was sworn to protect. He made me promise that I would never reveal its true purpose. And now, with his mind failing, I don't know what will happen. What if someone finds out? What if they come after the rest of our money, our property? He left me a mess, Ethan. A beautiful, perfect mess." Her confession laid bare a deep and complex web of deceit, money, and power. My grandfather's double life was not just an emotional affair. It was a financial one. He had used my grandmother's family money to support his secret son, while she, in a bid to save face and protect her family's future, had allowed it to happen. It was a Faustian bargain, a silent pact that had defined the next 60 years of their lives. "You have to help me, Ethan," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. "You're the only one who knows. You have to find a way to protect our family. He's going to die with these secrets, and I can't let them destroy everything he and I built. He kept his promise, Ethan. He kept Daniel out of our lives. You have to help me keep it that way." I had found the truth, but it was not a truth that brought freedom. It was a truth that came with a price, a responsibility. I was no longer an observer. I was now a key player in a legal and financial drama that had been brewing for half a century. The perfect family I knew was gone, replaced by a tangled web of lies and secrets, and I was being asked to become a part of the very conspiracy I had so desperately tried to unravel. What would I do? Would I protect the woman who had lived a lie for 60 years? Or would I finally bring the truth to light, no matter the cost to our family's fortune and legacy? The choice was mine, and the weight of it was unbearable. The weight of my grandmother's confession was suffocating. She wasn't a fragile old woman mourning a lost love. She was a woman who had spent 60 years making a series of calculated choices to preserve her family's social standing and financial security. Her tears were not just for her husband, but for the potential ruin of the perfect life she had so painstakingly constructed. She had made a deal with the devil, and now, with my grandfather's mind fading, she was terrified that the price would finally come due. I was no longer just an innocent bystander. I was her last hope, a pawn in a game of half-century-old secrets. I spent the next few days and days, the documents for Sarah and the birth certificate for Daniel burning a hole in my backpack. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them, but I couldn't bring myself to reveal them either. I was trapped, torn between a sense of justice for a family I didn't know and a desperate loyalty to the woman who had helped raise me. I knew that the secret trust fund was the key, the fulcrum on which our entire family's fortune balanced. The thought of confronting my father and aunts with the truth was unthinkable. It would not only shatter their image of Grandpa, but also risk the entire family estate. The ticking clock on my grandfather's health grew louder. His periods of lucidity became more and more infrequent, his voice a ghost of the booming laugh I remembered. The doctor advised us that it was time to consider hospice care, a final step toward an inevitable conclusion. The house, once a fortress of our perfect family, was now a hospice. It was in this grim atmosphere that my father brought up the financial logistics of my grandparents' retirement. "Mom, the market is changing," he said, sitting at the kitchen table with a grim expression, a pile of legal and financial documents between them. "We need to finalize the sale of the house soon. We need to secure your assets." "What about the retirement funds, the trust Dad set up?" My grandmother's eyes, filled with a familiar terror, darted to me. I knew she was thinking of the secret trust, the one set up for Daniel. I had to act. I had to protect her, but I also had to find a way to honor the truth. I needed a middle ground, a solution that didn't destroy my family's legacy while still acknowledging the existence of the other. "Dad, I was helping Grandpa with some old papers, and I found some things that suggest his finances might be more complicated than we thought," I said, choosing my words carefully. My father's head snapped up, his expression a mix of confusion and alarm. "There might be some old investments, some trusts that we don't know about. They're tied to a project you worked on years ago. It's a bit messy." It was a half-truth, a lie of omission. It was enough to plant the seed of doubt. My father, a meticulous man who valued transparency above all else, was immediately on high alert. He began to pore over the documents, his face growing paler with each passing moment. My aunts, hearing of the potential financial complication, were equally alarmed. The perfect family was now a paranoid one, their foundation shaken by the hint of a hidden financial secret. The house, which was supposed to be a peaceful memory, was now a legal battle waiting to happen. The tension in the house was a heavy blanket, a silent war being waged. The sale of the house was put on hold. My grandmother, seeing my gambit, gave me a look of cautious gratitude. I had bought her time, but I knew it was a temporary fix. The truth, in all its complicated ugliness, was just waiting to burst through the fragile dam I had built. The dam broke a week later. The doorbell rang one afternoon, a sound that was so rare it felt foreign. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch, his face weathered but kind, his eyes filled with an unspoken sorrow. He looked to be in his early 60s. He looked at me, a young man who he had never met, and said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Daniel. I'm looking for Walter Henderson. I heard about his illness, and I need to see him." My heart stopped. Daniel. He had found us. The ghost of my grandfather's past was standing on our doorstep, a living, breathing testament to a life of lies. I tried to feign ignorance, to protect my grandmother, to protect my father and my aunts. "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong address," I said, my voice shaking. But Daniel's eyes, they were too similar to my grandfather's. The same deep blue, the same kind, tired look. He looked at the house, a house he had never been in, a house that was a symbol of the family he had never had. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is the right place. My mother, Kathleen, told me all about it. She said my father was a good man, a kind man, and that he lived in a big house with a wraparound porch." My grandmother, drawn by the sound of the voices, appeared at the door behind me. Her face, when she saw Daniel, turned a deathly shade of white. The 60 years of careful composure crumbled. She looked at him, not as a stranger, but as the ghost of a life she had tried to erase, the living proof of her husband's unending betrayal. "Mom?" My father's voice called from inside. "Who is it?" I knew I couldn't lie anymore. The truth was standing right in front of us, and it was demanding its due. Daniel, the secret son, the other child, was finally here. The war was no longer being fought over whispers and documents. It was being fought in the flesh. My grandfather, lying in his bedroom, was fading. My grandmother, paralyzed with fear, stood in a doorway. My father, my aunts, my entire family were just inside. And I, Ethan, the grandson who had only wanted to help with a move, was now standing at the crossroads of two families, two lives, and two deeply buried truths. The facade of our perfect family was not just cracked. It had been utterly shattered by the appearance of the one person we were never meant to meet. Now, with Daniel's arrival, the true cost of my grandfather's lies would finally be paid. What would happen when my father and aunts finally came to the door? What would happen when they saw the living proof of their father's decades-long betrayal? The stage was set for a final, heartbreaking confrontation that would forever redefine the meaning of family for all of us. The doorbell rang again, a loud, demanding ring that shattered the fragile silence of the house. My father's voice, confused and strained, echoed from the hallway. "Who is it, Ethan?" I stood in the doorway, paralyzed. My grandmother's hand, gripping my shoulder, felt like a vice. Her face was a canvas of terror, a silent scream of 60 years of carefully constructed lies finally collapsing. Daniel, the man who looked so eerily like my grandfather, stood patiently on our porch. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man looking for his father. The conflict was no longer a secret confined to my mind and my grandmother's weary soul. It was standing right on our doorstep, demanding to be let in. My father, John, appeared in the hallway, followed by my aunts, Margaret and Susan. Their faces were drawn with the stress of the last few days, their concern for their father's health a heavy cloud. They saw me, frozen in the doorway, and then they saw Daniel. The collective silence that fell over the house was deafening, punctuated only by the distant, labored breathing of my grandfather from his bedroom. "Hello," Daniel said, his voice hesitant but kind. "I'm sorry to intrude. My name is Daniel Henderson. I believe I'm looking for my father, Walter Henderson." The words hit them like a physical blow. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Susan just stared, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. My father, John, simply looked from Daniel to me, then to my grandmother, a look of profound betrayal and confusion on his face. He didn't need a birth certificate to see the truth. Daniel's face was a mirror of my grandfather's younger self, a living, breathing testament to a family's secrets so deep it had defined all of their lives without them ever knowing. Who is this, Mom?" John asked, his voice shaking. My grandmother, her composure finally shattered, let go of my shoulder and sank into a nearby chair, her head in her hands. The silence was her confession. I knew I had to speak. I had to be the bridge. "Dad, I can explain." I began, my voice cracking. I invited Daniel in, and he entered, his eyes scanning the living room, a place he had never seen, but a place he had heard about his entire life. The room was a museum of his father's other life, filled with pictures of family he didn't know, a life he had been a silent observer to. I sat them all down, and I told them the entire story. I told them about the birth certificate for Sarah, the letters from Kathleen, the discovery of the second child, Daniel, and the 60-year lie my grandfather and grandmother had constructed to protect their family and their reputation. I spoke of the secret trust fund and the ongoing financial support my grandfather had provided to a woman he had never stopped loving. The reactions were a mix of anger, grief, and a devastating sense of betrayal. My aunts were furious, their perfect childhoods now tainted by a lie. "How could he?" Margaret cried, her face streaked with tears. "How could he do this to us? To Mom? Our whole life, our whole family was a lie." John, my father, was a man broken. He looked at my grandmother, his eyes filled with a new kind of pain. "You knew, Mom? All these years, you knew he was cheating on you, that he had another son, and you said nothing?" My grandmother, Eleanor, finally raised her head. "It wasn't that simple," she said, her voice filled with a desperate weariness. "Your father, he was a man of divided loyalties. When we married, it was an arrangement. It was what our families wanted. He promised to leave Kathleen. He promised that the child, Sarah, would be safe, and that his past would stay buried. I chose to believe him. I chose to live with a half-truth to protect my future, to protect you all. But he couldn't let her go. He couldn't leave his first love. And he came to me, years later, and told me about Daniel. He had set up a trust, a secret one, with a portion of my family's money to care for them. He promised me that as long as I kept his secret, our family's wealth, our legacy, would be secure. It was a trade, a promise. I got a family, a life of comfort and respect, and he got to be a part of another life he could never fully have. It was a Faustian bargain, and I chose to live with the consequences. Her confession hung in the air, a devastating tapestry of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. The perfect marriage was never about two people who loved each other. It was a complicated, symbiotic relationship built on secrets and promises. Then, Daniel, who had been listening in silence, spoke. My mother, Kathleen, passed away 5 years ago. She was a good woman. She never told anyone who my father was, only that he was an important man who loved us very much and had to do his duty to his own family. She never asked for more than he gave her. He visited us on birthdays, on holidays. He paid for my education. He was a good father in the way that he could be. I'm not here for money. I heard about his illness. I just wanted to see him one last time, to tell him thank you. His words hit us all, not with anger, but with a new, heartbreaking truth. He was a victim, just like we were. A victim, a man who had tried to love two families, and in doing so, had broken them both. Just then, a nurse came out of my grandfather's room, her face grim. He's asking for someone, she said quietly. He's having a moment of clarity. He's asking for Daniel. The room was filled with a stunned silence. My father, with a grim determination, led Daniel to his bedroom. My aunts followed, hesitant and unsure. I went with them. The room smelled of antiseptic and old age. My grandfather lay in bed, his eyes, so much like Daniel's, filled with a familiar sadness. He looked at Daniel, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Daniel, he whispered, his voice thin and fragile. You came. Daniel took his father's hand, a hand he had only held a few times in his life. I did, Dad. I came. I'm here. My grandfather's eyes looked at each of us, his two families gathered around his deathbed. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice catching. I loved you all. I tried to be a good man, but I was just a man. He turned to my grandmother. Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with a lifetime of gratitude and apology. You were my rock. You kept us all safe. Thank you. He closed his eyes then, and with a final, shuddering breath, he was gone. The funeral was a somber affair, but it was different this time. Daniel, now a known member of our family, was there, his presence a quiet testament to the truth. We didn't fight over the money. The trust fund, it turned out, had been an incredibly generous one, providing for Daniel and his family for generations. My grandfather had not only fulfilled his promise, he had exceeded it, his final act a quiet, financial act of love for a family he could never publicly claim. The perfect family I had always known was gone, shattered by a secret that had finally come to light. But in its place, a new, wider, and more complicated family had emerged. My father and aunts were still grieving, not just for their father, but for the loss of their childhood myth. The relationship with my grandmother was forever changed. We now shared a deep and painful secret, a shared understanding of the sacrifice she had made. Daniel and I, the two sons of a divided man, began an unlikely friendship, piecing together the life of a father we both knew in different, incomplete ways that my grandfather's legacy wasn't the perfect, flawless man we thought he was. It was the messy, complicated, and deeply human truth of a man who loved two women and had two families, a man who, in his final act, had tried to make them whole. The house was sold, the money was handled, but the truth remained. And in the end, it was the truth, not the lie, that finally set us all free. The perfect family was a myth, but the true family, in all its fractured, flawed humanity, was what remained. The secret was out, and our family, broken and beautiful, was finally ready to begin the long, difficult journey of healing.